Hello, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International.
And I'm CJ Hero. Welcome to the program. Now on tonight's headlines.
The number of confirmed coronavirus cases around the world passed 100 million since the start of the pandemic.
President Joe Biden signaled a tougher U.S. stance on Russia in his first phone call with President Vladimir Putin, raising concerns over human rights and aggression against Ukraine, but welcoming cooperation on a new nuclear weapons accord.
The IMF said the global economy is expected to see a strong rebound this year, but the coronavirus crisis is causing severe damage, slashing tens of trillions of dollars off the GDP.
And Saudis watch films from their cars at the first drive-in cinema in the capital Riyadh while maintaining social distancing measures against COVID-19.
The number of confirmed coronavirus cases around the world passed 100 million since the start of the pandemic, according to a Johns Hopkins tally. Take a look. As of 21:30 GMT, a total of 100,270,602 infections had been reported. Worldwide, at least 2,157,355 people have lost their lives to COVID-19. The vast majority of people infected with the virus recover, but some patients suffer from symptoms over or for weeks or even months. The official number of cases registered since the pandemic first broke out in China in late 2019 represents just a fraction of the real number of infections around the world. Many countries were late to implement systematic testing, and some continue to test only the most seriously ill. The poorest nations, meanwhile, only have the capacity for limited testing. The United States, which passed 25 million confirmed cases last weekend, remains the country with the largest outbreak. India is second with almost 10.7 million cases, and Brazil is third with more than 8.9 million cases.
The U.S. government is buying an additional 200 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine and will have enough to inoculate 300 million Americans, virtually the entire U.S. population, by the end of summer or early fall. That, according to President Joe Biden on Tuesday. An additional 100 million doses of vaccine are being bought from Pfizer and an additional 100 million doses from Moderna, the two companies whose vaccines have been approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, according to Biden at a press conference at the White House. Let's listen in.
Secret that we have recently discovered in the final days of the transition, and it wasn't until the final days we got the kind of cooperation we needed, that once we arrived, the vaccine program is in worse shape than we anticipated or expected. Manufacturing plans, I can announce that we will increase overall weekly vaccination distributions to states, tribes, and territories from 8.6 million doses to a minimum of 10 million doses. Starting next week, that's an increase of 1.4 million doses per week, always. So today, I'm directing COVID-19 response coordinator Jeff Zients here to work with the Department of Health and Human Services to increase our total supply of vaccine for the American people. And we believe that we'll soon be able to confirm the purchase of an additional 100 million doses for each of the two FDA-authorized vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna. That's 100 million more doses of Pfizer and 100 million more doses of Moderna. 200 million more doses than the federal government had previously secured. Not in hand yet, but ordered. We expect these additional 200 million doses to be delivered this summer. We're working to make vaccines available to thousands of local pharmacies beginning in early February. It's a couple weeks off.
Biden has pledged to provide 100 million COVID vaccine shots in his first 100 days in office, and he said the administration was increasing its overall weekly vaccine supply to states and territories. It is increasing the supply from 8.6 million doses a week to a minimum of 10 million doses.
And the first Tokyo Olympics test or event of 2021 will be postponed due to travel restrictions under Japan's state of emergency. Plus, the government may have to extend its state of emergency if no major improvement is seen in the number of infections. Joining us live is Dennis Liu. Hello, Dennis.
Hello, Alma. Good evening to you and to all our televiewers. Here's my update, Alma. The first Tokyo Olympics test event of 2021 will be postponed due to travel restrictions under Japan's coronavirus state of emergency. The artistic swimming test event, which will double as the sport's final qualifier for the Games and is set to feature around 10 countries, was scheduled to be held at the Tokyo Aquatic Center from March 4th to 7th. It could now be held in April or May, according to Japanese media outlets citing sources close to the matter. The International Swimming Federation and Japan Swimming Federation have determined travel restrictions on foreign nationals coming into Japan would make the event too difficult to organize, the report said. FINA and JASF did not immediately respond to the requests for comment, and Tokyo 2020 organizers said they would not address rumors. Japan's borders are currently all but closed to foreign visitors, with Tokyo and other parts of the country under a state of emergency until at least February 7th. Meanwhile, Alma, Japanese officials say the government may have to extend its state of emergency if no major improvement is seen in the number of COVID infections. Health authorities on Tuesday reported nearly 4,000 new infections across Japan. That mark a modest decline since the state of emergency was issued on January 7th. Tokyo's daily tally dropped below 1,000 on Wednesday, with 973 cases newly confirmed. The number has been fluctuating around 1,000 in recent days, but experts say cases in the capital are declining at a slow pace, and the proportion of elderly people infected is rising. And the daily death toll across Japan hits its second highest number of 104 on Tuesday. That's the third time fatalities have reached triple digits since the pandemic began. Hospitals are under strain, and there are worries that the number of serious cases could rise further among the elderly. Alma?
All right. Thank you very much, Dennis, for your update there in Japan. Looking forward for more updates coming out of there. You stay safe. Take care. Thank you for your time.
You too, Alma. Thank you very much. Reporting live from Tokyo, Japan, this is Dennis Liu for Eagle News. We live in interesting times.
Staying in Japan, vaccination drills are carried out jointly between the Japanese city of Kawasaki and Pfizer. Japan has agreed with pharmaceutical firms to receive enough doses for all 126 million residents and is working to approve the company's jab as the first to be used in Japan from next month. Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga has said vaccines are critical to holding a successful Olympics after last year's delay. The first shots for medical workers are planned at the end of February, leaving just 145 days until the start of the Games on July 23. Japan will need to deliver about 870,000 injections a day to inoculate half of its population by then, with each person needing 2 shots. The government reportedly aims to start vaccinating the general public against the coronavirus in May, just 2 months before the postponed Olympics, after targeted jabs for the most vulnerable.
Meanwhile, in the Philippines, the government will be transparent and accountable in vaccine negotiations. During the Coordinated Operations to Defeat Epidemic or CODE team visit in Taguig today, National Task Force Against COVID-19 Chief, Implementer and Vaccine Czar, Secretary Carlito Galvez, assured that our government will do everything to get 148 million doses of vaccine in addition to 40 million vaccines from the COVAX facility to vaccinate 70 million Filipinos by this year.
On the part of the national government, we will ensure that we will achieve our goal of securing the 148 million vaccine doses. This is excluding the more or less 40 million doses coming from COVAX facility to inoculate 70 million Filipinos within this year. Our negotiations with 7 vaccine makers are still ongoing, but we have already signed 4 term sheets. And we hope to seal deals within this month or early February. We expect the first batch of vaccine deliveries to arrive by next month. We are negotiating na meron pong darating na more or less 200 to 500 AstraZeneca for our health workers, ang Pfizer sa COVAX, and also 500,000 for Sinovac. So more or less, ang ano po natin, magkakaroon po tayo ng early rollout this February, more or less more than 1 million doses. Part of the shipment are vaccines coming from the WHO-led COVAX facility. Once again, we would like to assure you that the vaccines to be procured by the national government will undergo the stringent evaluation and selection process of the vaccine expert panel, the Food and Drug Administration, and our DOH. Hindi po papayagan ni Secretary Duque na yung mga vaccine po natin ay hindi po papapasa sa ating mga regulatory arrangement. We guarantee that there will be an utmost transparency and accountability in all our negotiation. And we commit to disclose all the details of our transactions in due time.
Meanwhile, divisions were on display Tuesday at the Davos Virtual Summit as nations called for fair distribution of COVID-19 vaccines amid fears of hoarding by rich nations. EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen also stated that companies producing COVID-19 vaccines must deliver as tensions mount between the European Commission and pharmaceutical firms over delayed deliveries. Watch this.
Europe invested billions to help develop the world's first COVID-19 vaccines, to create a truly global common good. And now the companies must deliver. They must honor their obligations. And this is why we will set up a vaccine export transparency mechanism. Europe is determined to contribute to this global common good. But it also means business.
With more than 100 million people now infected, rich countries that funded vaccine research are now raising their voices to ensure they get doses as tensions mounted over delayed deliveries. The Commission is demanding answers from British-Swedish group AstraZeneca and U.S. company Pfizer about delays both have announced to their deliveries to the European Union. In a sign of concern that pharmaceutical groups might be selling the earmarked doses to higher bidders outside the bloc, it is making a move to require the companies to notify authorities of any exports outside the European Union. The Commission is demanding answers from the two groups earlier mentioned.
È stato doloroso assistere alle sconfitte che questo virus.
Back in the Philippines, in the Laging Handa public briefing today, Department of Health spokesperson Undersecretary Dr. Maria Rosario Vergere said that people infected with COVID-19 and recovered still need to be vaccinated with the vaccine to prevent reinfection of the virus. Dr. Vergere also said that people with allergies to other vaccines, foods, or any medicine should seek advice from their doctor to find out if they can receive the vaccine. Take a look.
Po tayo ay nagkaroon na ng sakit dati ng COVID-19, tayo rin po ay kailangan pa rin magpabakuna. According to experts and according to WHO, the possibility of being reinfected is there. So we are advised to receive the vaccine still. Ngunit meron ho tayong parang rekomendasyon ang WHO na kailangan kung nagkaroon kayo dati ng sakit na COVID-19 and it was proven, meron ho tayong test, kailangan 3 months, ang sabi rin po ng National Immunization Technical Advisory Group, 3 months from the time that you had COVID-19 disease, tsaka po tayo magpapabakuna. Primary contraindications to vaccination, especially with these vaccines that are available now like Pfizer, given EUA, yun pong merong severe allergic reaction sa bakuna. Katulad ng component po nitong bakuna na ito, which is polyethylene glycol. So dun po sa mga taong nagkaroon na ng experience na nag-experience sila ng severe reactions, allergic reactions, nung sila ay dati nabakunahan ng kahit na anong bakuna, kailangan pong hindi muna bigyan ang taong to at ma-assess siya ng kanyang doktor. Kung ang mga allergies naman po ay para lang sa pagkain o kaya allergy sa gamot, kailangan lang humakahingi ng assessment and certification from their doctor and they are very well to receive the vaccine. So hindi po contraindication na kayo ay may allergy sa gamot o sa pagkain. Kailangan lang humacertify ng doktor that you will be eligible and you can receive the vaccine. Lang makapagpa-assess at makapag-certify ang iyong doktor that you are eligible and you can receive the vaccination. Yun pong talagang main contraindication ng bakuna ay severe allergic reaction. Ibig sabihin po, kapag kayo ay nabigyan ng bakuna in the past o kaya dun sa component nga po dito ng bakunang ito, ay maari magkakaroon kayo ng severe allergic reaction. Ibig sabihin, magkakaroon kayo ng anaphylaxis, yung nahihirapang huminga, nagkakaroon na ng mataas na pagtibok ng puso at baka magsasara na yung airways natin. So that's the anaphylactic reaction. Yan lang po ang tanging contraindication. The rest, pwede pong makakuha nitong bakuna as long as they are certified by their physician that they can receive the vaccine.
In other news, Russia's capital, Moscow, on Wednesday announced a further easing of COVID restrictions, citing the improving health situation, even as many countries tighten antivirus measures. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin announced the changes as European nations look to tighten their borders, with Britain struggling to counter a brutal third wave and the Netherlands facing riots over a coronavirus curfew. From Wednesday, bars, restaurants and nightclubs, which previously were required to close by 11 p.m., will be able to remain open through the night, though they will still have to enforce social distancing and sanitary guidelines. Employers will no longer be obliged to ensure that at least 30% of their staff are working from home, with the implementation of work-from-home rules now at the discretion of companies and organizations. Sobyanin's announcement made no mention of public gatherings, with a ban on mass rallies apparently remaining in place. As the second wave of the pandemic swept across Europe in the autumn, Russia opted against reintroducing strict lockdown measures like at the start of the pandemic in the spring, and instead pinned its hopes on the quick distribution of a vaccine to end its outbreak. Sobyanin said that over the past week, the city of more than 12 million people was registering an average of 2,000 to 3,000 new infections a day, a steep decline from some 7,000 infections it saw at the peak of its second wave. The mayor added that 50% of beds in coronavirus hospitals were now free for the first time since mid-June. However, he advised the elderly and people suffering from chronic illnesses to stay home.
Meanwhile, cities across the Netherlands were calmer after 3 nights of rioting against a coronavirus curfew, as authorities vowed to crack down on the unrest, blaming, quote, scum for the looting and arson and deploying a huge police presence on the streets. You don't capitulate to people who smash shop windows, according to Finance Minister Wopke Hoekstra. And he told this to ANP National News. Scum does this, he added. There were no major incidents reported in either Amsterdam, Rotterdam, or The Hague, where previous clashes had left a trail of looted shops, smashed windows, and burned cars in the worst unrest the country has seen in decades. A large crowd of young men gathered briefly and set off fireworks in Amsterdam late Tuesday, and 33 were arrested in the port city of Rotterdam for vandalism or breaking the curfew, according to police, but no serious incidents were reported. At least 400 people have now been arrested after the Netherlands imposed its first nationwide curfew since World War II. Several cities had granted police extra powers amid reports that fresh protests were being organized on social media against the 9 p.m. to 4:30 a.m. curfew. Justice Minister Ferd Grapperhaus also said the government would keep the curfew in place.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he takes full responsibility for everything that the government has done as the UK's COVID-19 death toll tops 100,000. Britain reported its first cases of the disease almost a year ago on January 29, but Prime Minister Boris Johnson was initially relaxed about introducing measures to tackle the spread. Then, as cases rose, he eventually relented and a lockdown was introduced in March, but questions have remained ever since about the government's approach, particularly its testing and tracing regime. Watch this.
I should just really repeat that I am deeply sorry for every life that has been lost, and of course as Prime Minister I take full responsibility for everything that the government has done. What I can tell you is that we truly did everything we could and continue to do everything that we can to minimise loss of life and to minimise suffering in what has been a very, very difficult stage and a very, very difficult crisis.
Meanwhile, Lebanese demonstrators continue to clash with security forces in the northern city of Tripoli as anger grows over a total lockdown aimed at stemming an unprecedented spike in infections. Tensions have risen and dozens of protesters on Tuesday lobbed stones, fireworks and Molotov cocktails at security forces in the city for a second night in a row. Ensuing clashes wounded at least 30 on the two sides, according to the official national news agency. Lebanon has imposed a round-the-clock curfew nationwide since January 14, barred non-essential workers from leaving their homes, and restricted grocery shopping to deliveries. The drastic measures came after daily COVID cases suddenly shot up following gatherings during the holiday season, overwhelming hospitals. The country has recorded over 280,000 coronavirus cases and more than 2,400 deaths stemming from the disease since the pandemic began.
President Joe Biden signaled a tougher U.S. stance on Russia in his first phone call with President Vladimir Putin, raising concerns over human rights and aggression against Ukraine, but welcoming cooperation on a new nuclear weapons accord. The call was initiated by the White House to discuss progress on extending the New START deal, which limits the two powers to a maximum of 1,550 deployed nuclear warheads each and expires February 5. An agreement now appears to be close. But White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said Biden also raised a raft of worries about the Russian authorities' treatment of opposition members, including the poisoning of Alexei Navalny. Watch this.
He called President Putin this afternoon with the intention of discussing our willingness to extend New START for 5 years and also to reaffirm our strong support for Ukraine's sovereignty in the face of Russia's ongoing aggression, and also to raise matters of concern, including the solar winds hack. And also to raise matters of concern, including the solar winds hack, reports of Russia placing bounties on United States soldiers in Afghanistan, interference in the 2020 election, the poisoning of Alexei Navalny, and treatment of peaceful protesters by Russian security forces.
The Kremlin said that in their call, Putin and Biden expressed satisfaction over talks, and the Russian leader later submitted a bill to Parliament on the 5-year extension. In Washington, a State Department official who asked not to be identified said the two sides had reached agreement to proceed quickly to conclude such an agreement by February 5.
Staying in the U.S., President Joe Biden, during a ceremony at the White House, signed several executive actions on racial equity that he says aim to make real the promise of America for every American. One of the measures would ultimately end the use of private prisons by the Department of Justice to house federal inmates. Let's listen in.
I'm going to sign these executive actions to continue the work to make real the promise of America for every American. Again, I'm not promising we can end it tomorrow, but I promise you we're going to continue to make progress to eliminate systemic racism, and every branch of the White House and the federal government is going to be part of that effort. Look, in the weeks ahead, I'll be reaffirming the federal government's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility, building on the work we started in the Obama-Biden administration. That's why I'm rescinding the previous administration's harmful ban on diversity and sensitivity training and abolish the offensive counterfactual 1776 Commission. Unity and healing. Yes, we need criminal justice reform, but that isn't nearly enough. We need to open the promise of America to every American, and that means we need to make the issue of racial equity not just an issue for any one department of government. It has to be the business of the whole of government. It's just been weeks since all of America witnessed a group of thugs, insurrectionists, a political extremist and white supremacist violently attack the capital of our democracy. And so now's the time to act. And the federal government's history of discriminatory
President Joe Biden ordered the end to the use of private prisons for federal inmates, saying they incentivized throwing more people in prison without improving on government-run jails. Biden also ordered the Justice Department to phase out the use of private incarceration facilities, which house about 16% of federal prisoners. Biden's prisons order was one of several he signed on Tuesday aimed at improving the treatment of minority groups and addressing systemic racism, which has left many groups, especially African Americans, economically deprived. Biden also ordered Tuesday the Department of Housing and Urban Development to address policies that historically have made it harder for minorities to own homes and resulted in more segregated neighborhoods.
Today, President Biden is continuing his commitment to embedding equity at the center of his agenda by signing an additional package of executive actions. The President will sign a memorandum directing the Department of Housing and Urban Development to mitigate racial bias in housing and affirmatively advance our nation's fair housing laws. He will also sign an executive order directing the Department of Justice not to renew any contracts with private prisons. We have established within our COVID task force an effort on equity, and that includes, obviously, racial equity, that will focus on health disparities, but also on the reality that there are Americans who, and particularly Americans of color, who, for very valid historical reasons, are skeptical and reluctant.
And the federal government's history of discriminatory housing practices and policies.
Changes to the tongue, the hands, or the soles of the feet could give an early indication of COVID-19 infection. According to Spanish researchers, they found this in a study presented on Tuesday. The conclusions emerged from research carried out among 666 patients with COVID-19 at Madrid's IFEMA Field Hospital, set up during the first wave of the pandemic, the regional government said. 1 in 4 patients said they had noticed changes to their tongue, while 4 out of 10 spotted unusual signs on the palms of their hands or soles of their feet. The study was carried out in April by healthcare professionals from Madrid's La Paz Hospital and Primary Care Services, with the findings published in the British Journal of Dermatology in the form of a research letter in September. Some patients reported a swelling of the tongue and the appearance of patches in what has been dubbed COVID tongue, which on many occasions was associated with a loss of taste. Another symptom was a burning sensation and redness on the palms or soles of the feet, which in some cases was followed by the appearance of small blemishes.
In other news, Indian police imposed heavy security and closed several main roads around New Delhi today, a day after farmers went on the rampage in the capital, leaving 1 person dead and dozens injured. The violence marked a dramatic escalation in a standoff between the government and thousands of farmers camped out on the outskirts of the city since late November. The farmers, mostly from northern Indian states, including Punjab, want new agricultural reforms scrapped that they fear will leave them at the mercy of big corporations. Farming has long been a political minefield, with nearly 70% of the population drawing its livelihood from agriculture in the vast nation of 1.3 billion people. The government has offered to suspend the reforms for 18 months, but farmer unions, who insist they did not condone Tuesday's violence, want nothing short of the laws being banned. The government says that the farmers have been manipulated by opposition parties, which have largely backed the protests. It insists the reforms will allow farmers to sell to private buyers instead of just at state markets.
Meanwhile, a string of mild earthquakes shook southern Spain overnight following weeks of strong seismic activity in the Granada area, prompting the premier to call for a calm on Wednesday. 3 of them had a magnitude of between 4 and 4.5, Spain's National Geographical Institute, or IGN, said on Twitter. Since December 1st, a total of 281 shallow quakes have hit the area around Granada, of which 8 had a magnitude of more than 3.0, an IGN statement said on Tuesday. Of that number, 41 were felt by the population. Another quake on Saturday in the same area had a magnitude of 4.4, causing cracks in walls and throwing objects to the ground.
And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
This portion is brought to you by Canriv Corporation, your ventilation and air conditioning specialist. Services offered: supply and installation of elevators, escalators, air conditioners, ventilators, jet towel, hand dryers, generators, access control system, factory automation, and modernization. For more info, please contact Ami Kanke at 0915-263-7198 or 0998-900-3224.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Welcome back. The IMF said the global economy is expected to see a strong rebound this year. But the coronavirus crisis is causing severe damage, slashing tens of trillions of dollars off the GDP. Optimism that new vaccines will bring the pandemic under control and allow economic activity to resume, coupled with stimulus in major economies, has boosted the IMF's growth forecast this year to 5.5%, according to its latest World Economic Outlook. Let's listen in.
Now, at $22 trillion, the projected cumulative output loss over 2020 to 2025 relative to the pre-pandemic projected levels remains substantial. In our latest World Economic Outlook, we are projecting global growth for 2021 to be 5.5%, which is 0.3 percentage points above our previous forecast. And then growth is expected to moderate to 4.2% in 2022. So we are living in highly uncertain times. We are projecting the world would grow this year as opposed to a severe collapse last year. But there is uncertainty. A lot depends upon the outcome of this race between a mutating virus and vaccines and how much policy support can hold up. And what we are seeing is divergence in prospects across countries. Now, if vaccines and therapies were to remain effective against the virus, we may be able to exit this crisis with less scarring than was feared and arrest the divergence in prospects that we now see across and within countries. However, that's not guaranteed unless we put in have more determined policy action. All countries must accelerate the rollout of vaccinations. The international community must act quickly to make sure that vaccinations and the logistics of delivery of those vaccinations is available globally to address what is currently a deeply inequitous distribution of access to vaccines across the world. Workers with less education, youth, and women and those informally employed have suffered disproportionate income losses. Now, over 90 million individuals are expected to enter extreme poverty over 2020-21, reversing the trends of the past 2 decades.
Meanwhile, the International Chamber of Commerce says that with the unequal distribution of COVID-19 vaccines, advanced economies stand to lose trillions of dollars through vaccine nationalism. In a media briefing of the World Health Organization, ICC Secretary General John Denton said supporting equitable distribution of vaccines is not an act of charity, but economic common sense. Let's listen in.
And anticipating the tensions and problems. We actually predicted at that point in time that unless the private sector was more involved, particularly when we saw the issue and the contours start emerging around vaccines and distribution of vaccines, then we were heading towards a problem, a real problem. Our hypothesis was that governments had failed to understand the interconnectedness and in particular, as the previous speaker just said, the impact of trade in goods and services and the interconnectedness of supply chains and the failure of those to continue to operate effectively until all are vaccinated effectively would actually exacerbate the economic damage to the globe. But importantly, that economic damage would not be visited just upon developing countries, but it would actually be effectively visited upon developed countries and economies as well. So the headline number was $9 trillion as economic damage, which would continue to flow unless the COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics were distributed equitably. But the point which we wanted to understand better, and which is clearly made here and has just been identified as well, was that about half of that actually affects developed countries. So if you actually want to actually fix your own economy, you're actually going to have to get involved in fixing the global economy. And part of that is ensuring that global vaccines flow globally and equitably. This is not an act of charity. This is economic common sense. If you want to ensure that the trillions and the hundreds of billions that you are spending on domestic stimulus is actually more than ephemeral, you need to ensure it's durable. It can only be durable if you actually also support access to vaccines and vaccinations and therapeutics in the developing world as well, across the globe, and equitable access there. That's because the failure of exports costs jobs. That's because of a failure to understand that a lot of jobs, for example, in the US, are as a consequence of intermediation of trade, where you get tyres for the auto industry being delivered and developed out of Thailand. And of course, if Thailand can't deliver and develop those tyres into the US market, which causes a slowdown and impairs the auto industry, then there's actually economic loss. And why can't they do that? Because they're being affected by COVID-19 and they're being restricted in their capacity to actually get their factories moving, get their workers to work, which is actually undermining their effectiveness because they can't get access to vaccines and therapeutics. So we welcome the opportunity to participate. The private sector is stepping up, as we have on issues like global mobility, where we not only talked about it, we developed tools like digital authentication to ensure that we can risk manage access to global travel again and get the economies moving.
Meanwhile, the economic impact of COVID-19 has confirmed what many have been thinking, that workers haven't been hit like this in generations. Here's Mayan Glosser joining us live from Switzerland. Hello, Mayan.
Hi, Alma. Thank you for having me. So like you've said, new UN data on the economic impact of COVID-19 has confirmed what many have been thinking. Workers haven't been hit like this in generations. According to the International Labour Organization, ILO, people trying to earn a living suffered massively in 2020 after the coronavirus started spreading globally early last year. ILO Director General Guy Ryder told journalists on Monday that the impact has been 4 times worse than the last major financial crisis over a decade ago. Let's take a look.
And above all, this edition of the Monitor confirms the massive impact of COVID-19 on labour markets in 2020. This has been the most severe crisis for the world of work since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Its impact is far greater than that of the global financial crisis of 2009. When comparing with the last quarter of 2019, we now see that 8.8% of global working hours were lost in the course of the year. And that is the equivalent of 255 million full-time jobs. As a consequence of all of this, there have been massive losses in global labour market income, equivalent, and this is before income support, equivalent to $3.7 trillion US. And that means 4.4% of global gross domestic product, an extraordinary figure. What we try to do this time is to look back at the year that's just finished, 2020, and really measure the damage, if I can put it like that. And the damage is very severe. A loss of working hours of 8.8% of total, 255 million jobs, full-time equivalents lost. Big hit, almost as big as 8.3% this time, to labour income. So the damage is enormous, unevenly distributed between regions and between different sectors of the workforce, and generally the most vulnerable, the hardest hit. And then we're looking forward to 2021 and the perspectives for recovery. I think we've all started this new year in the hope, maybe expectation, that things are going to get better. We lay out 3 scenarios of recovery for 2021, baseline, optimistic, pessimistic. Perhaps the bad news in all of this is, even on the most optimistic assumptions, we're not going to get back to the starting point. We're not going to recover all of the jobs and working time that has been lost. And the point we try to make in all of this is how well we do depends very much on the policies that we adopt. Obviously, the trajectory going forward of the pandemic matters enormously, but we do need to put in place policies for a human-centred recovery. We need to keep macroeconomic policies very expansionary. We need to target those who are most in need of assistance, look at the sectors of the workforce that have been hardest hit. We need to keep, or actually to improve, international solidarity, so those countries with the least means to invest in recovery get the support that they need, and you would expect this in the ILO, we place a very high value on social dialogue, the cooperation of governments with trade unions and employers' organizations to get the right answers, to get the right policies, and ones that have broad acceptance around the world of work.
These lost working hours came from reduced time at work, or what ILO called unprecedented levels of unemployment that affected 114 million people. The ILO said that pandemic restrictions may have accounted for the bulk of these people leaving the labor market, either because they were unable to work or because they stopped looking in third quarters of 2020. Marginal increases were also seen in mining, quarrying, and utilities. While there is still a high degree of uncertainty, the latest projections for 2021 show that most countries will experience a relatively strong recovery in the second half of the year as vaccination programs take effect. Back to you, Alma.
All right. Also, Mayan, the ILO also pointed to the uneven impact of the crisis, the crisis it had on the world's workers, affecting women and younger workers. Can you get us up to speed on this?
Yes, of course. So globally, employment losses for women last year stood at 5% compared with 3.9% for men. Women are more likely to work in the harder hit sectors of the economy and also have taken on more of the burden of, for instance, caring for children forced to stay home from school. Younger workers were also far more likely to lose jobs, with employment loss among 15 to 24 years old at 8.7% globally, compared with 3.7% for older workers. Many young people also put off trying to enter the labor market given the complicated conditions last year. The ILO found, warning that there was truly an all too real risk of a lost generation. Monday's report also highlighted the uneven impact on different sectors, with accommodation and food services the worst affected, showing a drop in employment of more than 20%. By contrast, employment swelled in the information and communication fields, as well as in finance and insurance. Looking forward, the ILO called on countries to provide particular support to the hardest hit groups and sectors, and also to sectors likely to be able to generate numerous jobs quickly. Back to you, Alma.
All right. Thank you very much, Man, for all your updates there. Looking forward to more. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you for your time.
Yes, you too, Alma, and thank you for having me again. I'm Mayan Gauza, reporting from the Geneva, Switzerland Bureau, and we live in interesting times.
Saudis watch films from their cars at the first drive-in cinema in the capital, Riyadh, while maintaining social distancing measures against COVID-19. According to Arab News, the pop-up can accommodate up to 150 vehicles while maintaining social distancing measure. Audience members will be required to wear face masks and have their temperatures checked in accordance with recommended measures. Food and drinks are available to be consumed in visitors' cars. Movies marketing director Mahmoud Mirza told Arab News that it plans to open 15 new cinemas in Saudi Arabia this year, adding more than 150 screens to its roster.
That's my body you're in. Oh, okay. Do you think you can walk?
I don't know. I failed body test drive like 436 times.
Meanwhile, a Singapore zoo released this video of its lion cub Simba, who was born in October last year after being conceived by artificial insemination. In January last year, in a first for the city-state, the male cub, named after the main character in Disney's The Lion King, was conceived with semen extracted from an elderly African lion using electric pulses. Let's take a look.
Finally, in our news, a baby giant panda, Fu Bao, the first to be born in South Korea, is glued to a zookeeper's leg and not wanting to let go during a regular checkup at the Everland Zoo near Seoul. Watch this.
Cute. We have some cute animal stories today.
I know. I want to have a pet panda. That's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I am CJ Hero. Please join us again tomorrow.
And at the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. I'm Alma Angeles, and
we live in interesting times.